We have to make sure that we're optimizing youth sports for the right individuals. The 1 to 2%, by all means, give them the support and the framework that they need to excel. But 99% of the children need our attention, and you shouldn't be coaching 8-year-olds like they're auditioning for a roster spot when all they really need is a child. If you start to attach like scoreboard becomes more important than anything else, and winning, and parents start alluding to questions like, did you win versus did you try your best, or you're having fun, what did you learn? You can really skew a child's direction, and really the outcome starts to be a lot less about fun and enjoyment.
Traditional development, how can those programs learn from the adaptive sports?
When you're thinking through inclusive programs, you have to have extreme flexibility when it comes to drills. Not every child is independently mobile. Some kids are going to come to you being in a wheelchair. Some kids may not necessarily have full use of their arms and or their legs. So you need to have flexibility. You have to have patience with pace. Just dropping like that rigid win-lose framework, all of which benefit every kid, not just the ones in adapted programs.
Welcome in, everybody, to another edition. This is season 4 right here of the Fighting for Overtime podcast. I'm your host, as always, Coach Tony. Make sure you're following on all social formats. And today's guest we have is Jason DeRocha. He's the vice president and growth coach of Sportball. Now, here's a great quote. Winning isn't the goal, development is. And today's guest is proving that youth sports, like we talk about, don't have to be cutthroat to be impactful. Jason from Sportball, he joins us to talk about how non-competitive, fun-based physical activity is shaping stronger and more confident, giving kids on and off the field that determination. So, Jason, thanks so much for joining me, man.
Thanks so much for having me, Tony. This means a lot to me, and I love the platform.
I appreciate this. Is your message is exactly why I built this podcast and why it's been growing for the last 4 years, and the audience has really been supportive of it. And let me just let everybody know, like, opening question here, man. This has intrigued me because I was all over your website, which you'll see going across the screen in a minute. What is Sportball and what is its main focus?
Sure. So Sportball is a sports education program for children from the ages as young as, believe it or not, 16 months, right to 12 years of age. And it's a multi-sport program. So we believe that children should be exposed to as many sports as they possibly can at the youngest of ages, because what we're trying to do is we're not here to produce athletes. We're trying to produce confident, resilient, physically literate humans that happen to play sports. So let them build some positive associations with their caregivers, their role models, their coaches. Let them to develop their physical literacy so that when they get older, they have the competence and confidence to perform well in sports.
A lot of programs like this don't exist right now. They really don't. You know that. I mean, I coached for 20 years and I watched the competitiveness even at the youngest age of 6 years old. I tell the story all the time. I remember, I volunteered before I really got into hardcore soccer for a baseball team, and it was 7 years old, and they called me, and it's a commissioner goes, "Hey, can you make a draft?" I was like, "A draft?" I was like, "What do you mean a draft?" He's like, "Oh, we draft the team." I said, "There's 7." And he was like, "Yeah, but there's some talented kids." And I was like, "Man, maybe I'm in the wrong business here," because I couldn't believe it.
Yeah. You got the 1 to 2%, obviously, who are going to be talented, but for the vast majority of kids, 99% of them, they give up playing competitively by the time they're 18 years old. So, we have to make sure that we're optimizing youth sports for the right individuals. The 1 to 2%, by all means, give them the support and the framework that they need to excel. But 99% of the children need our attention, and we shouldn't be coaching 8-year-olds like they're auditioning for a roster spot when all they really need is a childhood.
Nah, I totally agree. And again, it's a problem with today's youth sports, right? We talk about it though. So in your opinion, what are we getting wrong with youth sports right now?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've kind of inverted the value chain, right? Our goal really is that the risk really is that we create a system that feeds a really tiny fraction of the kids that become elite athletes. I think what we need to be optimizing for is ensuring that we are focusing on character development in kids. Having kids develop a mindset where they can actually start to think what was within my control and not what's outside my control. The reason why I feel like a lot of kids end up burning out as they get older is because we start to specialize them a little bit too young. We start focusing on pressure performance. Parents have their own outcomes that they desire for their children. When that happens, intrinsic motivation starts to get replaced by extrinsic pressure. Well, then you end up having kids that end up quitting sports at a far too young age.
It's crazy, man. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a stat, right? 70% of kids quit by the age of 13. And I think you just hit the nail on the head where you said specialization, right? I mean,
Yeah.
when I grew up, it was, hey, listen, I played all year round. I went from soccer to baseball to basketball. I got a jersey, a pair of socks, a hat, right? I was good to go. Now
Yeah.
it's like you need to pick one. I mean, and it's a shame because I think each sport, it tends to, especially with muscle development, it gives you certain movements, certain aspects of life that you may not go with all sports individually.
100%. And it's not just, physical burnout, it's like emotional burnout as well, right? Like the kids
Yep.
don't necessarily, if you start to attach, like scoreboard becomes more important than anything else, and winning, and parents start alluding to questions like, did you win versus, did you try your best, or you're having fun? What did you learn? You can really skew a child's direction, and really the outcome starts to be a lot less about fun and enjoyment, which I don't know about you, but anything that I don't enjoy doing, my incentive to continue with it is fleeting.
I mean that's in everything, right? That's in sports, it's in life, it's in your job. I mean, if you don't love what you do, your effort goes down, morale goes
Yeah,
down. It's really hard to push through every day just to, I mean, you kind of like going through the motions.
that's
And
exactly right.
right. I mean, and I think that's what, and I noticed that too with a lot of kids. And it's like, look, man, like you create that or foster that environment that talks about, I say it on this podcast all the time. I say it's not about wins, it's about memories and moments. And
Yeah,
right. I mean, some of my
100%.
biggest memories are not wins, they're losses, Jason.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're absolutely right. A lot. This is another beautiful part I think about being in this business for so long of youth sport. For us, social skills are innately built into sport. And if you can create enough positive associations with sports, it will factor and filter into every other aspect of your life. Having a great role model, having mom and dad in a class with you so that they can support you and encourage you as you score and as you miss. Having a coach focus on language that is more positive and uplifting versus comparing you to somebody else or what you did wrong. All of those things build confidence and build your competence. And then as you get older and you kind of start to know what great feels like, what a great caregiver, what a great coach feels like to be around, what they sound like to be around, well, then you're going to want to be around it that much more. And so when you get out there on the field and now you're playing with your peers, you now start to generate some of these skills like resilience and pro-social language and turn taking, coping with winning and losing and missing the shot and making the shot. You become a greater teammate. You end up developing an environment or being involved in an environment where your kids want other kids want you to play with them, coaches want you to play with them, and you actually want to be there as well because you like who you are in that environment. And then you think that can serve you in so many other places, in the schoolyard, at home, when you're playing with your brothers and sisters, when you finish school and you start to you get a job for yourself, like learning to play in that environment. These are all skills that you can learn on a field or on a court.
That's so true. I mean, you said a couple great things there. You talk about social skills, right? That's so paramount nowadays,
Yeah.
especially with digital technology and everybody's entrenched on their phone or their computer. It's like getting out and understanding what it's like to be a part of a team, what it's like to cheer somebody on. And on the other side too, it's okay, like what to take adversity, to deal with criticism. Like you have to deal with this. And
Yeah.
you right, you spoke about resilience. So what would you say? What does resilience actually look like in, from a 6 year old to a 10-year old or a 13? Because I'm sure that the changes in classification are pretty paramount.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's not stoic silence. I think that resilience is like bouncing back within a few minutes. So if you miss a shot, you ask to go again, or you get knocked down and you get back up, to get to the line without having a meltdown. These are all great signs of resilience. My daughter goes to a gymnastics studio and they give out these leadership beads where If a coach sees very specific types of actions that are happening throughout the day, they'll at the end of the day they'll reward them in front of their peers. And it's wonderful because when kids are young, of course, like extrinsic value and motivation is very important. But as a parent, it's really important to help your child understand that it's the action that counts more than the recognition. Making sure that they're focusing on why they're doing what they're doing, and helping to build that intrinsic kind of motivation is so critical for a child's development.
I listen. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I just from me coaching and I relate so much to what you're talking about because it's so true. I mean, you speak about your philosophy with sport ball in general. I mean, talking about confidence. What happens to a kid's confidence when they fail early in a hyper competitive system versus one like you're trying to building a fun first one?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think, if identity starts to get fused with performance, it becomes brittle, right? Like one bad game and the child's self-worth can take a huge hit. But if you fuse it more towards effort and character, then it becomes more durable. And you need to teach these children that they have the power over their mind and not the outside events. And if you teach that early enough through sport, then it becomes a life skill and not a sports skill.
Character, man, character, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's so huge. Talking again to Jason DeRocha right here of Sportball. Make sure you follow the website going across the screen right there. It'll be in the description at sportball.com. Doing a lot of great things with kids first programs out there. And over your course of being a listen as a coach, as a development leader, as a father, what are some signs that you have witnessed when you see a kid is possibly losing their love for the game?
Mm. Yeah, like dread before practice, negative self-talk, um, trying to please me as a parent
Yes.
versus themselves.
Yes.
And then complaining about like the emotional fatigue versus the physical fatigue. That's something that really stands out to me. I can tell when my little ones, I have an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old. I can start to kind of get the sense when something shifts, if there's more emotional fatigue than physical fatigue. So those are some of the ways where I feel like you can start to pick up signs that the kids starting to lose the love of the game, and you need to adjust and support them effectively as parents or as a coach.
Yeah, and it's a huge emotion is huge. I mean, listen, I'm not ashamed to say I sent you the episode with my daughter, and
Yeah.
and like you said, I'm not putting. You said it was powerful, and I've had many people tell me that, and that was real live emotion. I mean, that
Yeah.
is what me and her went through for years, and it
Yeah.
was the good and the bad, right? I mean, you could see,
100%.
yeah, and the reason why I did that, and I'm sure and I tell everybody is because I want a parent. I want a coach. I want a kid to look at that and be like, wow, like this is the kind of imprint, this is the kind of footprint that we've had. And then after my daughter, and I don't know if you listen to it, and if you do get a chance with this girl Noelle, who was a basketball player locally, and she talked about going through like crazy depression because of weight gain, physical issues that she had, and she had to really
Mm.
really find herself, and she did. But it's like just hearing that, Jason, I think that's a part that we all miss when we come up through this chain of youth sports.
Yeah, 100%. Listening to that podcast that you did with your daughter, like it brought me to tears. My girls are a little bit younger than yours, but the fact that that stayed with her for so long after the actual experience, it tells you the impact that, can be, can youth sports, if we take the wrong approach here, can it have a negative outcome? Well, unequivocally, yes. Like burnout, overuse injuries, anxiety, all of that. But just like even your own personal self worth can collapse around performance if you don't have the right structure and support systems in place. So yeah, I think that this is something that we all need to take very seriously because we all know people in our lives who have had negative associations or traumatic experiences with any type of activity that can make them apprehensive. They lose motivation, and when it starts to come to things like something as fundamental as you and I were talking about just before we launched the podcast today, you know, um, movement being so fundamental to your personal health and well-being, both mentally and physically. If you have too many negative associations with that activity, then even when you need to do it to preserve your own mental health and physical well-being, you may not have the courage or the strength or the desire to do it. And, for a lot of us who are already in our adult years, we need to learn this and make sure that we employ the right strategies for our children. So we're not setting them up for the same kind of outcome that we're all kind of facing here at our older age, complaining about these aches and ailments. We think that it's due to age, but maybe just due to this, physical inactivity.
That's so true. So true. And before I get into some special needs and inclusive sports, just as we go on, as we get into really what sport ball does, how did you get involved in all this? What made you say,
Yeah.
what, this is going to be my mission?
Yeah, I love that question. So, obviously, like most young athletic kids who dreamed to be in the NBA, I thought I was going to be a professional athlete. And I ended up having, I think 3 knee surgeries by the time I hit college. And I just knew that that wasn't in the cards. But I always knew I wanted to work with people. And I love sports. And I started to study child psychology. And I found sport ball at this really incredible crossroads in my life where I wanted to choose to do something that I was genuinely passionate for. And really, it was people in sports. And when I came across sport ball, I was working as a cognitive and behavioral therapist and working with children who had special needs and additional needs. And the founders of sport ball at the time, they had this wonderful program for, neurotypical children. They partnered with the community centers and the cities and the schools and the preschools and the childcares, and they delivered this incredible sport ball program to expose children to sport at a young age. And the founders came to me and said, look, there's a lot of children who have been diagnosed with special needs who integrate essentially into our programs, but it would be wonderful to develop an adapted program because some of the kids that come to us in a mainstream typical class, they may have, developmental needs or social needs that we might be better able to address in adapted programs. So that's what really drew me into sport ball. I knew that social skills were innately built into sport. So as a therapist, I could tease out things like pro-social language, turn taking, personal space, initiating conversation, all of those social skills that we may have seen gaps in with children with special needs. I could really speak to it in an adapted program. And what we did was we partnered with a lot of the organizations that service children with special needs. And in doing so, we recognized that a lot of these social skills, all of these social skills, they are important for all children in our mainstream neurotypical classes as well. And so I worked together really closely with the training team at Sportball, and we developed this really rich curriculum that focused on physical and social development in a Sportball class at the youngest of ages. And that's what really drew me into this work, and that I've spent 20 years of my life doing. And one of the biggest takeaways for me was that competition was never the right universal metric. It was belonging, it was meaningful participation, and joy. These are the metrics that actually matter, and they matter for every child, not just kids in an adaptive program.
No, it's funny. One of my pet peeves when I do all of these podcasts is I try to pick out a phrase or something that somebody uses. You just said meaningful participation. And that I love it. Because participation doesn't always have to be meaningful, right? So that's going to be like the tagline for this episode. I love it. I love how you said that. Now, I love that you created these and helped design these adaptive programs, because I do a lot of work with the special needs and the inclusive community as well. And I say, man, it's such a reward to see the smile and to see these kids having fun. It really is, because a lot of people don't understand their base of of friends, their base of participate is not the same as ours. It really isn't, right? And I mean, you look at this, how important is inclusion in youth athletics today?
Yeah, listen, every kid deserves an entry point regardless of ability level, right? So inclusive design it's not a side program. It's literally just a better design philosophy, period. Belonging and social connection, motor and sensory development, just a simple joy of movement. Like often the first place that they experience unconditional participation can be sport if you take the approach to inclusive design.
Now you may have answered this in a different, a different context as we've been here, but traditional programs, traditional development, how can those programs learn from the adaptive sports?
Yeah, listen, the best feeling is walking into a gym full of coaches and giving them creative twists on the skills and games and activities that they practice with kids. So when you're thinking through inclusive programs, you have to have extreme flexibility when it comes to drills. Not every child is independently mobile. Some kids are going to come to you being in a wheelchair. Some kids may not necessarily have full use of their arms and or their legs. So you need to have flexibility. You have to have patience with pace. You have like more of an individualized progress marker instead of like a single standard kind of assessment or way of or protocol. And then, just dropping like that rigid win-lose framework, all of which benefit every kid, not just the ones in adapted programs, but, thinking outside the box and giving opportunities for children to progress at a rate that's comfortable for them.
Patience, man, patience, practice with patience, right?
Yeah.
uh
Yeah.
it's it's so huge. And we talked about character development. We talked about what happens after the program, and it could be a little different with kids with special needs. What
Sure.
when your experiences, what do these kids gain from the sport beyond the game itself?
Yeah. So I think a few things. One is a sense of belonging. I think maybe that's the most important thing. Every child that I've ever met in my entire life, the number one thing is they just want to feel like they belong and they want to feel
Yes.
welcomed. And, a coach can meet them where they are, where they don't have to necessarily rise to just, to some type of level just in order to participate. Well, no, I think, being a part of a team, being a part of a club, being a part of a community and a program and feeling welcomed, I think is number one, is what they can walk away with. I think the other thing that comes from it as well is parents, especially parents for all of us parents, but being a parent in general is difficult, right? We need to take a test to learn how to drive a car. And unfortunately, there's no test to become a parent. And so we're all kind of building the plane as we're flying it, so to speak. So I have a lot of grace and patience and understanding for parents that are trying to figure it out. And, but for a parent who has a child with special needs, where, you know, that child requires even more care and even more support from the general community, having an opportunity to have like adapted programs where children and their parents can be there so that they can all avail themselves of the resources available. And that means other parents going through it, other coaches who are giving lots of wonderful feedback and advice and tips and tricks on how to make a more well-rounded experience for your child. You can really build a strong place for people to feel like I'm a part of a community that's going to make my life easier or better, or allow me to see some progress, some form of progress. And it can also form as just a form of respite. I get to let my hair down. I'm not being judged. I'm just accepted from where I am and what I can do.
That's a great point. I when I started this, I call this not a podcast. I call it a community, and for what
Mm,
exactly you just said. When I started this pod, the beginning was just my personal stories of anxiety that I went through, issues as a coach, issues as a parent,
yeah,
and the reason why I did that was so people could relate. And so many people came up to me, it's like, I thought it was just me. I had no idea. And it's like you create that sense of community where everybody can kind of bounce off each other. And like you said, you don't feel out of place. Everybody's accepted and everybody's going through the same thing, however, in different areas. And
yeah,
right. And so I love that you said that because it's so true.
yeah, yeah. I think, being able to be a part of an organization, we started here in Toronto 30 years ago. We're in our 31st year of operation.
That's
It was
awesome.
a really small operation here in Toronto. But when you do good work and you bring people together within the community, you won't see commercials and radio ads with Sportball on it. But what we believe is one parent telling another parent, one teacher telling another teacher, one community telling another community, one city telling another city, that you've got to get your kids exposed to a program like Sportball where they are supported and they are exposed to a multitude of physical activity so that they can develop their competency and their confidence so they can develop a passion. That message was so strong that we were able to grow right across Canada. We're in 5 states in the US. In 2010, our programs took us to Singapore. And then, believe it or not, Tony, we've just launched a state of the art facility in New Delhi, India, where children, where the infrastructure doesn't even exist there to participate in sport at a young age. Well, we now brought Sportball to New Delhi where kids are participating in our program. So our goal is to hit 100,000 kids by 2028. We're just over 70,000 a year right now across North America into Singapore and India. And our goal is to really just continue to expand and find like-minded individuals who want to bring this incredible multi-sport program to their community to get kids active and engaged at the youngest age. It's been the greatest privilege and honor in my life to be a part of an organization like Sportball.
That's huge, man. Those numbers are gigantic. And I don't think people realize the amount of work that goes into it. But like we talked about, the amount of work that you love to do because you're seeing that, that reward back, and just by a smile, just by kids having that option. It's crazy. I just had, and I didn't release it yet, but I just had the superstar from the US soccer team, Tyler Adams, on with me yesterday. And he's actually developing mini pitches for kids. He's partnered with, I think, Allstate, and the first one was in Georgia. And just to have a spot for kids to play all year round on a mini pitch, to get the touches in, to be together, and just more access to the sport, like he said. And it's kind of like exactly what you're saying. We definitely, Jason, we definitely need more of that for sure.
Yeah.
I'm a huge advocate, of that, 100%. Now, we talked about parents, and as we kind of wind this down, I want to get into some advice that you would have for parents, as obviously with your experience as a therapist, as experience as a coach, as a parent. What do you think is the biggest mistake parents make in youth sports?
Yeah. But again, I offer parents a lot of grace because, like I said, we're all figuring this out at the same time. But I think one of the risks is like treating youth sports like an investment with an expected return, scholarships or status or some form of payoff. I think that mindset transfers pressure directly to the kids. And so I think that's a terrible mistake. I think we need to keep the emotional register the same for both. So, like I said to you earlier, ask kids, are they having fun and what are they learning, and not, are you winning? And kids rate, the parents' emotion is essentially their scoreboard for kids at a young age. And so really having an understanding that your children are gauging, their reaction and how they should measure outcome just based on your own emotional reaction. So I think these are really, really important. And I think the other piece that's really important as well for parents is surround your kids with coaches and teachers and educators who genuinely have their best interests at heart, making sure that they are providing your child with an experience that they are going to be better because of it. I think that one of the things that we've pride ourselves on at Sportball is it's not just developing these really great multi-sport programs for kids and giving exposure. It's the training we put in to every single one of our coaches. Every one of our coaches that join Sportball, even if they have a wonderful competitive sports background and they hit it at the national level or competitive levels, it's great, but that's not what matters most. What matters most to us is, are you genuinely passionate about working with children at a young age? Do you care about their development? And do you take the time to make sure that they're improving and that their parents understand how to support their child and improve as well? So we have this philosophy of every skill, game, activity, and instruction at Sportball has a purpose. And we train our coaches on how to connect with kids, how to connect with parents, how to understand developmental levels, and then how to progress children at a rate that they're comfortable with. And so if you can do that, then you can inform a parent in such a way that when they leave a program experience at a young age like Sportball and they go to maybe something that's more community-based or more competitive, a parent knows exactly what they're looking for when they meet a coach.
That's and that's great because this is number one. It's a follow-up. Great question here about what should parents be asking coaches, right? That's a huge question. I don't think a lot of parents know what to ask.
Yeah, I mean, whenever I meet a coach for the first time, the first thing I'm asking the coach is how do you handle a mistake in class? If it's a competitive team, like how are you distributing playing time? What's your actual developmental philosophy beyond winning? Like really kind of get the sense of how they're approaching coaching and the game in practice. And it'll tell you right away whether or not this coach has actually given this some thought. But I think those are probably some of the more fundamental questions that you want to make sure that you're asking questions of the coach before you just drop your kid off to practice.
It's so true. I mean, usually I ask a closing question of what's your message to parents right now if they're listening right now and feeling overwhelmed. But I think we've kind of gone through everything and answered that. I think it's been a very informative, a very informative episode based on because it's not always about the kids. I say that all the time. The parents, and this is a shout out to all you parents that had to deal with my crazy buff for years, okay, and having everything meticulous. And but the thing is, Jason, I say this all the time. What you said is you as a parent, when you ask a coach, right away, is this coach for my kid? Can I relate to this coach? Is he going to have my kid's best interest at heart? Is he right? Is he more about the investment, or is he more about the kid? And I've always said that I treated my team and my kids like my own kids. So whenever I said my kids, it was everybody I coach. So if I expected 90s from my kids, I expected 90s from my team. And
Yes.
right. And unless they had a learning disability or they had issues getting it, I expected it. And they look at me like I'm nuts. Like my mom and dad don't even do that. I don't care. You're my responsibility now when
Yeah.
you're here. You know what I mean? So I think that's what a lot of people forget.
Yeah, 100%. I think, having a coach that cares that much, you can tell when you walk into a gym and you see the coach. Does he look your child in the eye? Does he use your child's name? Does he get down to your child's level? Does he greet you and shake your hand and introduce themselves, him or herself, and tell you a little bit about the program and the experience and what they want out of it? Like taking that command, taking full ownership when you are in that leadership position, I think is so critical as a coach. So if any coaches are listening to this, I really hope that you take that seriously. Own the space that you occupy. It's like someone walking into your house. That's the way that I think. You think when somebody comes, if I have a parent that walks into my gym with their child, it's like having them in my home. I greet them, I welcome them at the door, I tell them where to put their shoes and where to place their jacket. I get them a drink or something to eat. I sit them down. I make sure that they understand that I'm in control of this environment. I want to make sure that I have their best interest at heart, that they feel safe, that they feel welcome, and that I'm the kind of person that they want their child to be around. I think that's definitely the first step in being a great coach. And in terms of parents, as we talked about, like their role with kids and, what they need to know, I feel like they already have exactly what the kids need. They need to be present and they need to provide support regardless of what's on the scoreboard. Focus on, what's within your control. It's that old Stoic philosophy of just focus on what's within your control. Teach your children about what's within their control. You can't control talent and outcome and other families' choices, but you can control your attitude. You can control the environment to a degree, and show up for them regardless of the result. And help them to fall in love with the process, not the outcome. It's like anything that you do in life, but if you can put your children in a space where they can enjoy just the moment and just being there, well, then the outcome kind of takes care of itself.
Fall in love with the process, bro. Fall in love with the process, not the outcome. I like that. It's a really, really good quote. So true. So true. Jason, listen, man, this has been fantastic. Let everybody know where they can find. Obviously, they see scrolling across the screen right here. It'll be in the description. Go to sportball.com. And how do people get involved?
Yeah, totally. So, if they go to sportball.com, they can find all of our programs across Canada, the US, Singapore, India now. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I think that's probably the best, Jason DeRocha on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to chat with anybody. If you're interested in bringing a Sportball franchise to your community or programming or some form of partnership, we're all ears. We want to work with like-minded individuals who have a vested interest in developing children's physical literacy and just developing a passion for sports and play. So on LinkedIn, and that's the best way to reach out to me. And now I feel like I'm on a ton of podcasts and I'm doing a lot of these interviews, and so I feel like they'll be able to find my content anywhere. But LinkedIn is probably the best place to reach out to me directly.
No, I saw you just start doing was that Magic Makers? Is that
Magic Makers podcast? Yeah, all of the franchisees that are in the Sportball system, I now interview them because they all saw this dream and they all wanted to bring it to their own community, their own city, their own country. So we just thought, let's help them tell their story. Let's bring them to the forefront and make sure that everyone has an idea of how we can get children active and engaged in the most meaningful way. And for us, it's through Sportball.
That's a big deal. And again, you can find them on the YouTube page for Sportball. I saw you find the Magic Makers right there. Really, really good storytelling right there to find out what what these individuals' visions and passions and dreams are as well. But in closing, Jason, again, I appreciate it, man. I look forward to continue to connect, and who knows, maybe we can find something we can work on together down the line, because I think we both have the same vested interest when it comes to kids and making sure youth sports is revived the right way.
Absolutely, Tony. I'm a huge fan of yours. I think that you're doing great things, and anything that I can do to support your efforts and collaborate with you, I'm all in. And I'm sure that the rest of my team would say the same thing. So, thank you so much, Tony, for having me on today. It was wonderful.
I appreciate it. And there it is. Again, this is the Fighting for Overtime podcast. Make sure you follow on all social formats, and we'll get back to you next time. Fighting for Overtime is a Rise and React media production. If you're looking to start a podcast, if you're looking to get some direction, hit us up, let us know. We'll help you out there as well. Again, for everybody, enjoy your time, memories and moments, and keep fighting that fight. Continue to fight in overtime to make your kid have the best experience that they can have when it comes to playing youth sports.